Thank you. Well, when Howard West, Kilvin and Mowll arrived in Sydney on the 1st of March 1934, the principal of Mowll College, David John Davis, was recovering from surgery. Davis's health was in serious decline. A month later, he would take 6 months recuperative leave in the UK, and a little over a year later, he would be dead. The health of its principal was, however, not the most serious challenge the college was experiencing as the new Archbishop arrived. Enrolments were weak. The opposition to the liberal evangelical tenor of Davis's theology had grown in recent years. In March 1934, there were 18 resident students and 14 non-resident. The college library was in close to disarray, an impediment to study which further exacerbated the growing disquiet. The college's buildings were in need of significant renovation. To cap it all, the college was once again in debt and its overdraft was growing. To some eyes, the future of Mowll College was beginning to look uncertain. Janet West's library lecture on Davis is subtitled "A Principal Embattled." She portrays him as a godly and principled man who was opposed by powerful laymen on the Mowll College committee. And there's no doubt that he was a pious and gracious person in the way in which he dealt with people. The plaques to his pastoral care of students that are still present in the college testify to that. However, the concerns about Davis and his theology were held much wider than that, both in the diocese and in the college itself. Marcus Sloane later wrote that the diocese was split from top to bottom over questions of modernism, so that there was a dreadfully low state of things by the end of the 20s. Davis was opposed by some of his own students. One was Stephen Bradley, who later became presiding bishop in the Church of England in South Africa. He wrote of how the bishop coadjutor of Sydney, Sidney Kirby, asked him to go to Mowll College since, quote, its principal and staff were definitely liberal and not at all in tune with the Sydney diocese, and he wanted someone to resist from the inside. Another of those students arriving at Mowll a little later than Bradley was Marcus Sloane. They and a few others gathered to pray that either the principal should change his attitude towards the faith once committed to the saints, or he should resign. It's actually picked up by the Sydney Morning Herald under the title, "Students Pray for Death of Principal." Best not to know about these things, which vindicates my lack of a subscription to the Sydney Morning Herald. Other students rallied around Davis in support, resulting in a palpable and unpleasant divide in the student body. Howard Mowll knew that his theological college was in trouble even before RMS Orford steamed through the heads of Sydney Harbour. News had already reached him about the fragility of the college, and correspondence with him in the months prior to his arrival had raised significant questions about its leadership and direction. He attended his first meeting of the college committee later that month, March 1934. Only 2 months later, he was able to inform the committee that he had lunched at college twice, was thoroughly dissatisfied with the food, but more importantly, was anxious to raise the whole tone and standard of the college and its training. In his first presidential address to a Sydney synod, delivered on the 10th of September 1934, while Davis was still on his way back from the UK, he made clear his intention. With respect to Mowll College itself, I trust, he said, that before long we may be able to rebuild the college, transforming it into what it should be, in view of the great purpose it is designed to serve. The report of the Mowll College Committee to the Synod that year commented that, since the arrival of His Grace the Archbishop, he has shown great interest in the college, which he has visited on several occasions, and he has presided at every meeting of the committee. But when he spoke to the Synod about transformation, was Mowll simply talking about the plant and the finances? The Archbishop's more significant concerns made it into the daily papers. In December that year, The Sun reported a new policy for Mowll College. Soon after his arrival in Sydney, Archbishop Mowll made it clear that he realised the urgent need that the ministers of the church should be well equipped intellectually and educationally. In order to secure a high level of ability in clergy of the diocese, says Church Times, the Archbishop is introducing the principle that a matriculation pass will be required of all students entering Mowll College and a university degree for all seeking ordination. The policy of the college will be shaped accordingly from now on. So it's sometimes suggested that it was T.C. Hammond, Davis's successor, who spearheaded the raising of academic standards at Mowll College. And there's obviously a great deal of truth in that. But the evidence suggests that Mowll himself was more involved than is often realised. Even before Hammond was appointed, while Davis was still recovering in England, Mowll had set about his plan. Throughout 1934, the college committee rejected a number of applicants who had not attained matriculation. In the short term, this new policy put further pressure on enrolment numbers. There were only 5 new students for the academic year on the 8th of March 1935, which began on that date, contributing to a total of 12 resident students in the college, with 15 others who were not in residence. The resultant financial constraints meant that the vice principalship was left vacant following the resignation of George Corrie Glanville in mid-1934. He'd actually been passed over twice as acting principal during the principal's illness, first for Arthur Wade, the rector of St James Croydon, and then when Wade was injured for William Hilliard, the headmaster of Trinity Grammar School, and he understandably took this as a vote of no confidence and so resigned. The old house was closed down, the principal took a reduced stipend and had to supplement his income by marking leaving certificate examination papers. A man who was seriously ill was being further worn down by the situation in which he served. Meanwhile, the Archbishop appointed the newly ordained Marcus Sloane as resident tutor and chaplain of the college. On a number of accounts, this was a strange appointment for him. It's difficult to imagine that Mowll was unaware of Loane's experience of college under Davis. Indeed, Loane himself knew that Davis would not welcome his appointment to the staff. Furthermore, Sloane had not served in a parish, and the Archbishop was concerned that the college prepare men for parish ministry. However, the Archbishop was determined, and over objections from Sloane himself along those lines, made the appointment. The writing was on the wall. Mowll was going to ensure the transformation that he desired. Archdeacon Davis attended the college committee meeting on the 21st of June 1935, suffered a heart attack the next day, and died in Royal Prince Alfred Hospital on the 29th of June. It was a tragedy which drew a large outpouring of sympathy, even from those who had voiced their concerns about his principalship. In his letter for the Sydney Diocesan Magazine, dated the 1st of August 1935, Archbishop Mowll spoke of how Davis had given himself unstintingly to the work of the diocese, the Christian Church in Sydney, and the Masonic fraternity. A very large number of friends and fellow students attended his funeral in the cathedral. Tragic though Davis's death obviously was, though it did give Mowll an opportunity to realise further his plans for transforming the college. He once again appointed Arthur Wade as acting principal. The concentrated attention given to the college at this moment meant that its dire condition became more widely known. In his presidential address to the Synod on the 23rd of September 1935, Mowll remarked, "The death of Archdeacon Davis and the desire to find the best possible man as his successor has made the financial position of Mowll College a matter of specially anxious concern. There is an overdraft of £5,000 and the building needs to be rebuilt or extensively repaired. A new chapel is needed and more adequate financial provision for the staff." The Archbishop's plan to secure the college's future involved the amalgamation of Mowll College with the parish of St Philip's, Sydney, in York Street. The property in Newtown would be sold, the new principal would become simultaneously the rector of St Philip's Church, and plans would be drawn up to rebuild the college on the block of land surrounding the church. This would provide better facilities and a more stable flow of income. It might even make it easier to secure the services of the right person to be the next principal. The Amalgamation Ordinance and the Sale Ordinance were both introduced in the first week of 1935 in the Synod. The Amalgamation Ordinance was passed in the second week, but the Sale Ordinance was not. Apparently, an impassioned speech by one of the trustees, Herbert Langley Tress, scuttled the idea. And, as we heard before, Howard Mowll spoke in the debate, a tactic which somewhat backfired, as people didn't want him to determine the course of the debate on the floor. As a result, the responsibilities for the parish of St Philip's and those of the principal of Mowll College would be combined, but their properties would not. In the years to follow, the wisdom of that decision would become clear. Mowll's plan for the transformation of the college also involved the appointment of a scholar with unambiguously clear evangelical convictions as its principal. He was in perfect agreement with the committee, which reported to the Synod that year, in September 1935, that the future of the college largely depends on the man selected as principal. The Reverend Thomas Chatterton Hammond was suggested to him. There's no evidence, at least no evidence that I can find, that they, Mowll and Hammond, had met prior to this, but Hammond had visited Sydney in 1926 in the midst of the prayer book controversy. During that visit, he had impressed leading evangelicals in the city with his ability to defend the Protestant character of the Church of England. No doubt he appealed to the same people who had been vitally concerned about the theological direction of the college just a year before. Hammond was the General Secretary of the Irish Church Mission, and though at 58 years of age he would be the oldest man appointed to the office of principal, then or since, he had an international reputation as a fiercely intelligent evangelist, apologist and theologian. The Standing Committee of the Diocese was informed at its October meeting that a nomination for the principalship had been made, but the appointment was not announced until the 20th of November. So when you think about it, Davis dies in June, the end of June, and the Standing Committee is told in October. That's not a very great deal of time for the appointment to be made or to be settled. The Sydney Morning Herald reported the appointment on the 26th of November with the comment, "Mr Hammond has the reputation of being a brilliant philosophical and theological scholar and is a good preacher." The paper recorded that Hammond accepted the appointment by cablegram on the 5th of December. He took up his responsibilities as principal and rector upon his arrival in Sydney on the 14th of April 1936, arriving on board the very same ship which had carried the Archbishop 2 years before. And in fact, the other interesting note is that when he left Portsmouth, he was farewelled by a man called Arthur Lucan Williams, who had been principal of the college when it was still in Liverpool in the 1870s. The appointment of T.C. Hammond as principal of Mowll College was not without controversy. He was not everybody's first choice. He had a reputation as a strident Protestant, an effective controversialist, and a bit of a street fighter. But what experience did he have as a theological educator? More concerning to some, would he introduce a more aggressive form of conservative evangelicalism, in stark contrast to the moderation and tolerance of a variety of viewpoints that had characterised the tenure of his predecessor? Contributors to The Outlook, described as a small paper with a private circulation among some of the clergy, voiced just this concern. Quote, "Unless he is less intractable than on his former visit, his success will only come through the withdrawal of many liberal-minded men from all matters outside their own parishes." Yet, as the Archbishop pointed out, Hammond was also a man of undeniable intellectual ability. Mowll introduced the new principal at the 1936 Synod as the first gold medalist of the University of Dublin and an outstanding teacher. Earlier in the year, at his official welcome on the 14th of April, Hammond himself had been a little more circumspect. "There is no more important duty in the world," he said, "than the training of men for the sacred ministry of the gospel. There is no field of study so extensive, with so many ramifications, as the field of theology, and in a humble way, I trust I may be able to bring some contribution to the great cause we have at heart." Mowll himself might have watched carefully during those early months, aware of the concerns raised by Hammond's reputation as a polemicist. However, he remained undeterred from his plan to transform the college into what it should be. He soon discovered that Hammond was equally determined to move things in the same direction. The Archbishop presided over the Mowll College Committee meeting in August 1936, when it was agreed to extend the college course from 2 to 3 years. 2 years studying towards the THL and a third year of special studies. And it's clear that Hammond was enthusiastic about this development, may indeed have been the initiator of it. He was certainly the one who brought the proposal before the committee. But given that he was, at the time, only 4 months into the role, it seems reasonable that Mowll was also heavily involved. The consistent push towards a higher academic standard faced an early test with a proposal from one of Mowll's own supporters to create a Bible college at the newly acquired property of H.W.K. And it's an interesting story of a Bible college that started with an acting principal because the designated principal resigned a week beforehand, and you'll have to read about it when we get to the book. It was closed in 1943 when it became a hostel for women during the war, H.W.K, and is now, as you know, student accommodation for Mowll College. Mowll now had the first of the 3 principals he would have the opportunity to appoint in place. He'd secured the matriculation standard for entry into the college and had overseen a general uplift in its academic standards. In May 1939, the college reported to the diocese 22 students studying for the THL, 6 more studying divinity in the university, and 8 more accepted for entrance in the following year. This affords gratifying evidence that the decision to raise educational standards is meeting with success, said the report. Yet the author of the report, writing in the Archbishop's magazine, could also remark, "A great deal remains to be done in order to make the premier theological college in Australia worthy of its position and of the Diocese of Sydney." Next, an appeal was launched for the renovation of the college buildings, and I'll save you that detail for the book as well. So, resetting the theological direction, raising the academic standards, renovating the plant, just 5 years into Mowll's time as Archbishop, each of these was accomplished or well underway. The remaining task was running down the college debt and establishing the financial provision for needy students. And the Archbishop kept drawing attention to these needs in his monthly newsletter, which listed those who had contributed to the Mowll College appeal. An Embertide appeal was instituted for the training of men for ministry at Mowll College. And by the end of the Second World War, what had been a £5,000 debt when Hammond arrived had been whittled down to £207. However, the cost of the building would soon turn the figures into the red again, and in 1952, Mowll would tell the Synod that the financial situation of the college is one of growing concern for church people. He mooted the idea of a parochial assessment to provide for the training of students. In retrospect, Mowll's appointment of Hammond was a masterstroke. It marked a turning point in the college's history and set a trajectory upon which the successive principals would build. More widely, Mowll came to rely particularly heavily on Hammond, especially in controversial matters. The principal acted as his chief theological advisor at the time of the memorialist controversy in 1938, the Red Book case in 1947, and the dispute over clerical vestments in 1949. No doubt partially in recognition of this contribution, Hammond was made an archdeacon without territorial jurisdiction in 1949. However, Mowll continued a lively interest in the college, which he saw as integral to his larger strategy of strengthening and growing evangelical Christian ministry within and beyond the diocese. The student body had trebled in size over the time of Hammond's principalship, from 27, of whom only 12 were resident in the college in the year prior to his appointment, to 80 in the year of his retirement, 1953. By the end of Hammond's time as principal, the Archbishop's vision for the college had been largely realised. The question now became how to build on that strong foundation for the future. The retirement of T.C. Hammond as principal in 1953, though the 76-year-old continued to serve as rector of St Philip's, provided an opportunity to move the college forward in the next stage of its life. The ordinance, which combined the principalship with the ministry at St Philip's, was repealed, and Hammond's successor would be free to devote his time exclusively to the leadership of the college, at least in theory. However, the question of just who this should be remained. Mowll took his time. Marcus Sloane, the vice principal, seemed an obvious choice. Yet the Archbishop, now 63 years old himself, was at the same time considering what to do about the need for an assistant bishop for the diocese. He approached Sloane with a choice. He could become a bishop and continue as vice principal, or he could be appointed principal. Sloane thought the first proposal was practically unworkable and was keenly aware of the need for continuity in the college staff. After all, not only was Hammond retiring, but Alan Cole had indicated that he would leave in the new year to serve in Southeast Asia. Herbert Min had gone for overseas for study for a doctorate, and Broughton Knox had not yet returned from Oxford after completing his. And so Marcus Sloane opted for the second proposal, but still the Archbishop seemed to linger. At last in October, he announced that Canon Marcus Sloane would become principal of Mowll College at the beginning of 1954. Sadly, with the loss of all the Archbishop's private papers, we may never know the full story of the appointment, something Sloane alluded to in a letter to his friend Bishop Alf Stanway, then serving in Tanganyika, on the 6th of December. Now, someday you may know the full story of the appointment, and we don't. Nobody knew. So what is clear is that Sloane was a popular choice for the role. It's just that the Archbishop had other ideas as well. I'll conclude in just a moment, but let me tell you there's an intriguing point about the appointment of the vice principal to replace Sloane at the time. Once again, the details might seem to be lost to us. However, it does seem that the new principal was not the one responsible for the appointment of his vice principal. He told his friend Stanway in January of the next year that his preferred choice would have been Harry Bates. In the end, the Archbishop appointed Broughton Knox. Knox's appointment created a level of anxiety for a number of people. And Alan Blanche has suggested that TC's unhappiness at the transition may well have been in large part because of Knox's appointment. He had had experience of Knox as a member of the faculty from 1947 until he'd left from doctoral studies in November 1949. Actually, if you go and have a look at the college committee minutes, you find almost every meeting was peppered with letters from Mr. Knox making some suggestion of other for change in the college. So he'd made a rather pest of himself during that period. Even as a junior lecturer, he had decided he had ideas of where the college should go. Marcus wrote to Stanway with these comments. What I'm afraid of is that he, Knox, will try to push his policies in ways which will be very much for my discomfort. And then there was the other factor, he was, after all, his brother-in-law. So there's no evidence at all that Marcus's interest in the college abated during the principalship of Marcus Sloane. He continued to be involved in the affairs of the college, even though his agenda in national and international affairs enlarged, particularly when he became primate. The Archbishop still chaired every meeting of the college committee and its executive when he was in town. He sponsored the various appeals for the college. His presidential addresses soon revealed that he continued to see the college as a priority. We must press forward, he said, in providing adequate endowments for the salaries of lecturers, for research scholarships, so that the ablest students may continue at the college after the completion of their ordinance course. I'm running out of time, so I'll leave the story of the appointment of Broughton Knox, which is very interesting, not least because while Howard Mowll wanted to have his first choice was a man called Alan Cole, who was a missionary like him in Asia. Alan Cole, though, was very keen on going back to the mission field, and Howard Mowll did that. And there's no indication at all that his appointment of Broughton Knox was reluctant or that he had reservations. In fact, one of the very last things he wrote before he died about a week or two before the diocesan synod in 1958 was his presidential address. It was completed before he died, and so it was read by the administrator of the diocese at the synod, and it included this paragraph. The appointment of the Vice Principal, Dr. Broughton Knox, to succeed Bishop Sloane as Principal of Mowll College will take effect at the end of the year. Dr. Knox has served on the staff of the college since 1946. More recently as Vice Principal, his lectures on theology have greatly impressed those who have heard them and show the fruit of his preparation at Cambridge and at Oxford and in Sydney. At a time when the college is showing great expansion, it is fortunate to have a man who knows the college and its needs well and whose theological learning has already made a deep impression. He is popular with both staff and students. Doesn't sound like somebody who was reluctantly making that appointment. In the end, the Knox appointment was Mowll's last great gift to Mowll College. Of course, he could hardly have known how long or significant Knox's term as principal would be. In what would be 2 tumultuous decades of rapid social change, Knox would be responsible for building the college into a place with an international reputation for a thoroughly biblical and richly theological training for Christian ministry, and for a persistent, even dogged determination to assess all thought and practice in line with the teaching of the Bible. When Howard Mowll arrived in Sydney, the situation at Mowll College was precarious. Some wondered whether it would survive. It had lost the confidence of many of the clergy of the diocese and even its own students. At the end of his time as Archbishop, the college had healthy enrolments, a strong young faculty, and strong academic standards. The college had been transformed physically, theologically, and even spiritually. It was playing a crucial role in deepening and strengthening Christian witness in the city. Mowll did not achieve this alone, of course, yet it could not have been done without his continuous support and his wisdom in a number of critical appointments. In Marcus Sloane's assessment, few institutions in the diocese could have owed more to Archbishop Mowll's energy and his enterprise than Mowll College. Almost a century after his arrival, it's fitting that we remind ourselves of the contribution which, under God, he was able to make.